Hello, welcome everybody. Hello everyone, I'm Paula Luna with Battleborn Progress. Thank you so much for joining us for another OIF. This week we're talking about gun violence prevention. As you know, this Sunday marks the 6th anniversary of the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history at the Route 91 Harvest Festival right here in our state. Our panel for this episode features distinguished guests who are deeply committed to gun violence prevention. Joining us tonight, we have Nevada Senator Dallas Harris. We have Lonnie and Sandy Phillips with Survivors Empowered, Gina Springman, a Moms Demand Action volunteer and a licensed clinical social worker, and Aaron Urup, state and federal policy attorney with Giffords. Thank you all so much for joining us. Senator Harris, I'd like to start with you. I know you're traveling right now, so hopefully we got you at a good time. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to start with you because a few months ago, we just wrapped up the legislative session, and gun violence prevention was one of the many issues that you were working on. And I thought we could start off by you telling us about how you felt the legislative session went in terms of gun violence prevention, and if what could have been done better or just different overall, kind of your feelings about it.
Yeah, so I think, the Democratic majority delivered, right? And what we really needed to see was some bolder action from our Republican governor. We had bills that I think were just common sense that we sent to him, and he chose to veto all three of them. So in terms of what we could have done better, it's getting a supermajority so that we can actually pass some of these super important things. But the legislation and the policy is there.
Absolutely. And I think that, we had several senators and assemblymen and women that supported, the gun violence prevention work. And I feel like, survivors and advocates really showed up. And I think that's key to really, keep the momentum going. In your opinion, how can we ensure that gun violence survivors and advocates' voices are being heard by legislators and by folks that are in power?
Yeah, so I think you hit on the key, right? And that is showing up. Don't be discouraged by the fact that we did not get it done in this legislative session. Okay. It doesn't matter almost what the issue is. It often takes multiple times to get meaningful things passed. And so, what I need everybody to do is to do a bit of self care, recharge their batteries, right? And then let's go right back at it. We need to let everyone know how important this is to Nevadans so that hopefully we can get something done.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you all my questions for you in case we happen to lose you. I can get everything in, and then that way, if we get disconnected or anything, you can continue with your trip. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about we're gonna do as we have our orders, right? We're gonna go, we're gonna rest, we're gonna self-care, we're gonna get back at it. When we do get back at it, what would you like to see as far as like local level policy changes to improve public safety and reduce gun violence? What are we getting back to?
So I think this needs to be a kind of all level of government approach. Go see your city council. Go see your county commission, right? The county commission actually has control over the strip. The county commission in Clark County is one of the most powerful bodies in the state, right? Your state legislatures, that's us, right? Go see your governor, write, call, show up at meetings, put this on their agenda. Things don't just show up on their agenda, the people have to put it on their agenda. And the way that you do that is by showing up and making it clear what matters. Make it clear what you will be voting based upon, right? You will not be supporting folks who do not put this issue at the top of their list. That type of message to the people who have control over these policies really resonates. So it's really about getting out and letting those in power know that this is so important to you that there will be electoral consequences if changes aren't made. Because frankly, the other side's made it very clear, right? Anytime you even attempt to try some gun violence prevention measures, they're going to take you out. We need to make it just as clear that if you do not act to keep us safe, we will be taking you out. This is an issue that will be at the top of our minds when we're filling out our ballots. So, hit everybody, hit them twice, hit them 3 times, hit them 4 times, show up, email, call, do it all, get it on their radar, get it on their agenda. And that's always a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we talked locally. We're going to hit everybody locally. I'm going to pull back for your last question. President Biden recently announced the White House has a new Office of Gun Violence Prevention. The office, for those of you who aren't aware, this office is going to focus on implementing gun violence prevention measures enacted through Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Do you think that's a step in the right direction?
I think I lost you at the end there. Can you give me just the quick snippet at the end of the question?
Yeah, it's a very obvious answer, I think. But do you think that is a step in the right direction, the building of this office?
100%, right? I mean, it's the first time we've seen a president do this. And so one of the ways that I think the president and the executive, what's important to them is by raising these issues to the level of the vice president, creating a brand new office in the executive branch. And so I'm thrilled about this new office and kind of excited to see what the possibilities will be. We've seen Vice President Harris kind of just kill every assignment she's been given. And I have no doubts that she's going to take this assignment and maximize the benefit as well.
Absolutely. We're super excited about it too. We're going to be talking a lot more about it throughout the show. I am going to let you go, Senator Harris, because I know you're traveling. I want to thank you so much for joining us. And, thank you for all your support and all the work that you're doing.
My pleasure. Always nice to be with you guys. Thanks. Have a good night.
All right. Well, that was very kind of her to join us while she was traveling. And we actually have a lot more amazing guests on our panel that we're going to get to right now. I want to start with Lonnie and Sandy Phillips. Thank you so much for joining us. It's just such an honor for us to have you all. And I'm going to go right off the bat with your first question, but feel free to talk more about what you do. This question should set you up for that, though. As the 1 October anniversary approaches, we are reminded of survivors and victims. You both are such a true inspiration, and as you have traveled to all of these mass shooting sites since your daughter was lost at the Aurora shooting. Can you talk to us about what you've seen with the victims and the survivors that you've met?
We've seen a lot of trauma. And it's been interesting over the last 10 years. We were the only ones talking about trauma early on. We were living in Texas when Jesse was killed in Denver, and nobody to this day has called to notify us of her death. We got the news from inside the theater. The young man that was with her called me and told me. He thought he was going to die. And we could hear the screaming in the background, and he thought that the shooter was reloading, and he called me before he called his own mother, and he was wounded. So he survived. My daughter didn't. She was shot 6 times with an AR-15. So since that time, we just decided that we were going to be there for other survivors because nobody had been there for us. So we've gone to over 21 mass shootings. If we haven't gone, we have sent somebody. But we have been to 21 mass shootings now. Survivors Empowered has been. And we'll continue to do that. We are now looking at developing regional response We'd like to see the president actually have a FEMA-like response to mass shootings that would deploy and take survivors for peer-to-peer support, because there's nothing like having somebody hold your hand that's already been there, done that, and understands what you're going through. So with peer-to-peer support and trauma therapists, not trauma-informed therapists, but actual trauma therapists that would go on the ground immediately, because we know the faster that they get support, the better off they do. So that's what we've been doing and will continue to do.
So Sandy Hook was our first and Uvalde was our last. So there were bookends for us. I mean, Sandy Hook, we thought we can at least get something from Sandy Hook. Everybody wanted some laws passed, and we couldn't even get the low-hanging fruit. We couldn't get background checks expanded, so that was pretty disappointing. And then Uvalde was the last one, and it was very disappointing because of the response from the police and the fact that it was awful. So in between that, we've been to 20 others, and so we've learned a lot about survivors.
And we've also been pushing for the Office of Gun Violence Prevention at the White House since Biden was elected, very quietly in the background with a couple of other very small organizations. The grassroots up has really made a difference in getting that accomplished.
The Time Is Now coalition. I think we had like
35, I think.
Since early 21. So yeah, it's been a hard push, and but we just keep dripping on them. And like the senator said, you just have to keep pushing.
That's right, and thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story and everything that you've done since then for survivors and advocates alike. We really appreciate you. And we have also on the show today Gina, who's done also so much in our local community. She's joined us a few times to talk about gun violence prevention. So I'd like to bring her in. And it's so easy for me to ask the questions, but I know these are tough subjects. So please, take your time, or if there's anything that you want to talk about or not talk about, please let me know. I definitely want to respect that. Gina, if you're comfortable, I do want to talk about your experience as a survivor of the Route 91 Harvest Festival, and what have you experienced and how did it change your life?
Yes, thank you, Paula. And I think it just goes to show that even in the midst of having this experience and being able to talk so much about it, that when Sandy and Lonnie can share their story, you can still be brought, right back and be touched. So I'm really thankful that they're here on this call too, and to always have survivors in this work. Yes, on October 1st, 2017, I was with my oldest sister, my best friends, at the Route 91 Harvest Festival. It was my second year attending. I had gone with my best friend the year prior, and we were just, listening to music, looking out. You can actually see the whole strip, the lights over our hometown, our city. And then just about a little bit after 10 o'clock, we heard just this massive sound, really uncanny to the sound of fireworks. So much so that I told my friend, who was actually concerned, they're just fireworks. They must just have had fireworks this year. Then when someone yelled, "Get down," we did. It's really, I don't really know how to explain what it feels like to be on the ground with about 20,000 people at the same time. My oldest sister put her body over my friends and me. And when she told me to run, I did. I just honestly remember running as fast as I can. It's kind of a blur. I texted my mom, "There's a shooting." She's like, "Where? The concert?" I'm like, "There's a shooting. We're running. I love you." I really thought that was the last thing I would ever say to her. And I think it's just a reminder that I'm in this work, because there's a lot of people that can't send those text messages and calls. And I was able to that day. I am so very grateful that everyone I was with that day is physically okay. But that does not mean that the emotional scars don't stay with you forever. I was a student in my Master of Social Work program, literally learning how to be a trauma practitioner. I'm now a licensed clinical social worker. My sister, who was with me that night, is a licensed clinical social worker. And when you're a clinician and you're trained on these skills, and we have the privilege and the access to these mental health resources, and you're still affected by this 6 years later, that shows you how impactful this violence can be. And this mass shooting, unfortunately, is the deadliest mass shooting, but there's acts of gun violence daily. And my family continues to have trauma of this. And then, of course, to continue to hear the stories of other survivors, because, you want to say not one more, and then there is more. And you want to keep going. And sometimes, like Senator Harris was saying, you do feel defeated. How are we going to keep going when everybody just lives their life like this isn't happening? But the reality is there is a lot of people that care. There's a lot of people in this movement. There's the strongest people I've ever met are survivors that keep going. And I really can't say that enough, that's the reason why I keep doing it. I'm really grateful. I've come a really long way to be able to say my story, to get through my story. Sometimes it kind of just feels like a part of me. But the reason that I stay in it is because it keeps happening, because there's parents of children from Uvalde that are posting and doing this work. And if they can do this work, and if Lonnie and Sandy can keep doing this work, then I sure as heck can keep doing this work too.
Paula, I think this shows how trauma affects survivors, whether they were shot or whether they were just whether they witness it, whether they are in the same surrounding areas. It affects us at a level that sometimes makes it impossible to function well. And one of the things that we started doing early on was to develop a mindfulness program to treat the PTSD. And that, as I'm sure Gina will confirm, has been a change maker for survivors who have gone through the program, and them taking that program back into their communities. So we're developing mindful communities that are, I don't use the word healing, we use the word restored or restoration. So we're really proud of being able to create that program with the University of California in San Diego. So, and it's open to anyone, and it's free, which is even better. So we're in the middle of trying to develop the next program, the next classes, and the first retreat for survivors of gun violence to actually go through an experience with us.
So we went to Las Vegas, and it's a watershed for us because of all the ones that were killed at the time. That's the largest public mass shooting in history. And we remember I think it was 51 killed, is that right? 58 killed. But think of all the survivors of that's one mass shooting that had 700 something survivors, is that right? Is that what you remember? I think that's the right number. So it had the largest number of survivors of any mass shooting we've ever had. And that's one of the things that started us thinking about survivors always get forgotten. I mean, how many can we name?
Yeah.
No, that's so true. And like just like the work that you're doing is amazing. And that's where I find some comfort, right? Like in the work that everybody's doing, like this is something that I think you had said it earlier, Lonnie, that the I don't think momentum is maybe the word you use, but there's definitely like movement happening. And this is actually a perfect segue to Aaron. I wanted to bring Aaron in because Gifford's doing a lot of that work. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell the audience a little bit about Giffords and what you do for Giffords?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. And thank you, Lonnie and Sandy and Gina, for being here as well. Giffords is a gun violence prevention organization that was founded by former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. She survived a mass shooting that took place in 2011 at a constituent event she was having in Arizona. And as a state and federal policy attorney with Giffords, I write, review, and analyze legislation. I work with our government affairs team and coalition partners to advise legislators and pass bills that will prevent gun violence and help survivors.
Thank you so much. What is, and this is going to be a question that I'm eventually going to ask everybody, but we had talked about the President Biden's announcement about the House of Gun Violence Prevention, the Office of, sorry, Gun Violence Prevention. Do you think this office is going to help with mass shootings at a federal level, or what do you hope to see with the formation of this office?
Yeah, the formation of this office is it's a huge step forward to ensure that the federal government has a coordinated and comprehensive effort to address gun violence. And like you mentioned earlier, it's going to take a big role in implementing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That legislation was a huge victory. It was one of the first bills passed in the last 30 years on gun violence at the federal level. But we want to make sure that those laws that are on the books are effective, and that the resources are going where they need to, and that the processes are in place so that the things that are on paper are actually happening. And having a White House office overseen by the Vice President to really make sure that all of those really detailed things that need to happen at the state level, local, tribal levels, working with all those entities to make sure that these things are happening, and to make sure that communities can access the funding they need. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act has, I think, $250 million worth of funding to go towards gun violence prevention. But local and state organizations and communities need to know that that's there, and how to access it, and how to apply, and having just that overarching entity that is really laser focused on making sure that these things happen, I think is going to be a huge benefit to having this office.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I feel like it could be too. Lonnie, I and Sandy, I noticed you guys came off mute. I didn't know if you had something to add there.
Yeah, Erin, when she was talking about access to funds, so important. We know that VOCA is going to be slashed this year by, I think it's either 40% or 60%. I think it's 60%. And it's already hard enough for survivors to get their hands on funds or get the support that they need to perhaps have trauma therapy or whatever their medical needs are, that VOCA could and should cover. It's very, very difficult, and it's very hard for people who are traumatized to go through that process and fill out the paperwork and then stay on top of it. And we need to simplify that and make it streamlined so they fill out one piece of paper and it goes with them, just like their social security card number goes with them everywhere they go. It shouldn't be the way it currently is, and we need to really address that and make it simpler for the needs of survivors to get the access that they need.
So when we took our tour in the South, we went through towns like Birmingham, I think, was one of the worst. Then we had meetings with some of the survivors.
It was Baltimore.
Baltimore. It was the worst. They had horror stories about how they had to jump through hoops to get any kind of money, any kind of help. They had to bury their own child and beg the government to reimburse them for the money. It was just awful, the way they were treated. And that's one of the reasons we pushed so hard for this office in the White House, gun violence. But this is going to help a lot.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that would be like. And there's so many at so many levels, right? That things can be done, and hopefully we can get some of this happening. There's the creation of that office is a huge win, but there's clearly still a lot of work to do. Gina, I want to bring you back in, and I know this is kind of not a simple question to answer, but in terms of gun violence prevention, what solutions do you think we can implement as we move forward?
Thank you, Paula. I think just kind of what Senator Dallas Harris had been talking about, she is such a champion for us here in the Nevada legislature, along with our supermajority of Democrats. I was up there past spring, I was up there with about 20, 25 in person, other Nevada volunteers of Moms Demand Action, survivors, leaders, family members, just supporting these bills. And so the solutions are in this legislation. And I think that's what brings me hope as healing, brings me hope as a survivor in my own healing journey. And it brings me hope for my family members when I have anxiety about their interactions with gun violence. So the solutions are within us, but they really lie within the people that we elect as well. And so at the federal level, it really it just shows it means a lot as a survivor to be heard. And I'm so grateful for the work that all of these organizations do. I always tell everybody it doesn't matter who's doing it; it's how it gets done. It really takes all of us. It's going to keep taking all of us. And it takes people that haven't been personally impacted too, because the people that have been personally impacted need to take a break sometimes. So it's really as much or as little as you can do, but it takes everybody. It takes analysts, it takes lawyers, it takes people in the elected positions, it takes survivors' voices. This is just, it has to be everybody. Everybody has to realize how important this issue is, or it's just going to keep being at a standstill. And I think we saw the difference with this administration. I was there last June, I believe. Survivors and students got together in front of the Capitol building, and we spoke to senators, and that was right before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act got passed. So like I said, there's no words for how important it is to be involved and to keep showing up. Because all of these things have happened because nobody has stopped pressing for it. And I've only been doing it for 5 years. And obviously, Lonnie and Sandy have been doing it for longer. And there's people that keep going in this movement for that long. So that's what it's going to take. And that is where the solution lies. It lies within us.
And it also needs to, Gina touched on this just a little bit. It takes partnerships. It needs to not just be moms, not just be Giffords, not just be Lonnie and Sandy and Survivors Empowered. It needs to be coalition building. And when those coalitions are developed, they are so much stronger because you have the faith community, you have moms, you have survivors, you have lawyers, you have doctors. That has so much power when you go to meet with anyone that's an elected official. And we haven't talked a lot about, we talked about local, but let's get real local. Let's look at what's happening with our school boards and start going to our city meetings, our city council meetings, and I won't say raise a little hell, but raise a little hell. Let them know that you're concerned about this issue, not only because it happens in our schools, but because it happens everywhere at any time, anytime, anywhere to anyone. And again, I think Gina mentioned that this has to be everybody involved, because just because it hasn't happened to you yet doesn't mean it won't happen to you. So 1 in 5 people will be affected by gun violence within the next, 5 years? I think the statistic was. That's a terrifying thought. And we used to say, 6 degrees of separation, but with gun violence prevention, it is 1 degree of separation from being our story and Gina's story being your story. So you need to be involved.
And nobody has a better right to raise hell than the survivors of gun violence. They're the ones that get listened to. They're the ones that are righteous. We have a purpose. What's more important than the death of your child? Getting to shoot an AR-15 for fun? I don't think so.
I think that's, absolutely right. I mean, we know the power of stories, and these stories are so impactful. I can't imagine, hearing these stories and not feeling and not understanding, right, where that something must be done. Aaron, I noticed you came off mute. I didn't know if you were going to jump in there. I didn't want to cut you off if you did.
No, I think I just had left myself off.
Oh, okay. um, but yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm going to open up this question kind of to everybody, because how do we, obviously bringing in, people to tell their stories, connecting survivors and coalitions, is what I'm gathering would be a huge, largely impactful. But what do you all think are other ways that we can reach these people that aren't understanding, or aren't hearing these stories, or aren't caring enough, right? And that's kind of the $1 million question, because I think if we knew the answer, we'd be doing it. But I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on what you all think we could be doing to kind of expand our reach.
I think we need to be working with the media anytime we can. I don't care if it's print media, news media, national media, or local media. I think we need to be working with them to educate them on the questions they really need to be asking. We've been saying every time there's a shooting, somebody should be asking, where did the gun come from? Number one, not who shot it, but where did the gun come from? Where did the ammo come from? Because there are very few restrictions. Actually, there aren't any restrictions on ammo in this country. So if we could control the ammo from being sold in these huge amounts. Our shooter was able to buy 4,000 rounds of ammunition online without showing his ID. The case in right there in Las Vegas, I mean, he had thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds. I can't remember the number of guns, but it was massive. And we were just very lucky that he was taken out as quickly as he was.
Yeah, that's that actually brings me to a question that I wanted to ask Aaron. A lot of these mass shootings, these firearms, they are purchased legally, and I think Sandy was just talking on a key aspect that we don't talk about, which is the ammo. But what do you think we can do to combat these legally purchased weapons that are being used in these mass shootings?
Yeah, and I think they really touched on an important point, because people have a wide range of feelings about firearms and what people should be allowed to do or not do. But there are some common sense policies that can be passed and implemented that, folks really should be able to agree on certain things that keep people safe while still preserving, the Second Amendment rights that folks have. For instance, I'll talk about assault weapons. These are military style firearms. They're designed for combat settings. They're designed to fire many rounds very quickly and to be very deadly. And so that's why these weapons appeal to mass shooters, because that is their goal. As the senator mentioned, there were some bills that passed through the legislature in Nevada this session, and they were vetoed. And one of those bills would have raised the minimum age to purchase certain types of these weapons from 18 to 21. And we know, we see so many mass shooters who are very young and who were able to walk into a dealer and buy an assault weapon and ammo for it and kill people very quickly at 18, 19, 20 years old. And that is just a common sense limitation on certain types of firearms at certain ages that can really keep people safe. And so that is, something that, we want to continue to work on in Nevada and in a lot of places to make sure, because when you have all these different state laws, even if one state has a good law, if you just go to the state next door and skirt that law and then drive back over to your state, having this patchwork means that there are so many ways that things can fall through the cracks. But common sense things like, for instance, large capacity magazines that can hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition. And they're so concerning because they allow someone to shoot so many more rounds before they have to stop and reload. And that can be an opportunity for folks to get to safety, or for law enforcement to take down that person. But if they are firing many, many, many rounds before they ever have to reload, it's just increasing the likelihood of injuries, of deaths. And that's also something that Nevada doesn't have restrictions on. I think there are right now 14 states in the District of Columbia that ban large capacity magazines. There are 10 states and the District of Columbia that ban assault weapons completely. And the bill in Nevada was even more limited. It wasn't a total ban. It was just on a limited age range. And so the final thing that I wanted to make sure to mention is, a law that Nevada does have in place. It's called in Nevada, it's called Protection Against High Risk Behavior Order. And that means that family or household members or law enforcement can go to the court and say, we are really concerned that this person is a high risk of harming themselves or harming someone else. And for a period of time, they should not be allowed to possess firearms. And if the court agrees, then that person has to give up any guns that they do have, and they're not allowed to possess guns while that order is in effect. And so for someone who is seeing that person every day, is living with them, it's their family member, there are things that are concerning for them. But if people don't know that exists, then they're not going to know what to do when they start to see these warning signs. And so that is a law that is already passed in Nevada. And so, but it's about now making sure that people know it's there and know where they can go to start that process to make sure that person is safe themselves and also does not harm anyone else or commit a mass shooting or attempt suicide.
And here is what Aaron said just then, applies to what happened in Las Vegas and back again to what happened at the borderline shooting in Thousand Oaks. There was a young man that survived the shooting in Las Vegas and then was killed at the borderline shooting. The person that committed that crime, his mother had tried to get the gun taken away from him. The sheriffs in the county did not like that law and pretended they didn't know how to implement the law. And you can't prove that they didn't know how to implement the law, but they say they didn't know about the law. And so the law wasn't implemented. Had it been implemented, he'd be alive today. So these laws, these red flag laws or emergency protection laws, are incredibly important to the overall safety of the public. And thank you for mentioning that, Aaron. It's something that we need. And thank you for mentioning the fact that we have these patchwork laws across the country. And that's why we need some federal laws implemented to really make a difference in trafficking of weapons and some of the laws that we know would save lives if they were implemented nationally and not just in state to state to state.
And thank you for saying that assault weapons need to get off the streets. That's the first thing. Sandy and I screamed as soon as our daughter was killed. How did it happen? That get them off the streets. So we know that's a bridge too far. We've been told so many times by the big organizations. But look what's happened in 10 years. First of all, they didn't want us to talk about it. And now everybody's on board and they're winning on let's ban the assault weapons.
Well, they're winning on running on gun safety, which is so important. And we're very proud to have a partnership with Giffords and be working with you to educate people across the country on this issue.
Yeah, because of Giffords, we started out wanting to do something about the guy that sold the bullets without checking his license, and we ended up changing the law in Colorado because of it.
Yeah, thanks
so
to
one
you.
Good thing,
thanks to Giffords. It never would have happened without you helping us to repeal that law. So now we need to repeal it in every state that it exists, and we need to repeal the federal PLACA law. For those of you who don't know about it, it's the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, and it's basically the immunity law that protects anyone in the gun industry. So.
Yes, thank you so much for all that information. We're going to put resources. We're actually already putting resources in our chat. But to anybody watching, if there's anything that you missed, any resources that you need, please reach out to us. We will be happy to provide that information or get you to connect it to the right people. We'll also going to be sharing the social media tags for all of our speakers tonight, so you can reach out to them and stay informed. We're going to go to a couple audience questions, and then we can go kind of through some final thoughts as we wrap through the show. But I want to start off with a question that's in the audience that was, What are some common misconceptions or misunderstandings about gun violence and how it should be addressed? And I know we talked about some of these issues. And again, this question is not just for any particular person on the panel, but whoever wants to jump in. Some misconceptions and misunderstanding about how to address gun violence.
One thing that, and we've been talking about this a little bit, but I think that the discussion around mental illness and gun violence, sometimes it seems to be, the focus seems to be in the wrong place. You hear people say, well, it's not access to guns, it's mental health. And conflating someone who has a mental illness with an extremist or someone who is motivated by hate or other things that are going on. And the reality is that most people who have a mental illness are not a danger to anyone. But obviously expanding access to mental health services is a good thing across the board, but that talking about it that way without talking about the access to firearms, it's totally missing the point. And when we talk about gun violence and mental health, we should be talking about the effect on survivors and on whole communities like Las Vegas or like Uvalde, and the long-term commitment that's needed to restore those communities and those survivors, and that is something that doesn't happen on a timetable, and it's not something that just jumping in for a day or a week or a month right after something happens is really going to solve the problem. And so that is a shift that I would like to see change in the discussion around mental illness and gun violence.
We don't have any more mental illness in this country than they do in any other developed country in the world. So, that whole diversion, yes, is comical to me. And that's all you have to say when you hear that, is to say we don't have any more mental illness here in this country than anywhere else in the world. So what's the difference? The difference is easy access to guns.
Yeah, and a misconception too would just be that you have to be personally impacted by this violence to be involved also, because we, like Sandy and Lonnie were saying, we have been personally impacted, and they've been doing this since 2012. And if we could have pushed some of those things, we wouldn't be sitting here 11 years later if we had endless support from the entire nation. And I hope that we're sitting here in 10 years talking about all of the improvements that we made, and there's no more mass violence and there's no more community violence. So you don't have to be personally impacted to be involved in this movement, and you don't need to make it your entire priority. There's little things you can do along the way as well. There's literally 3 different organizations on this call. There's local organizations. You could literally put in gun violence prevention and get involved today just by calling one person. So you don't have to be personally impacted, and you don't have to make it your entire mission. It'd be great if we all made it our entire mission, but whatever time you have, this is a fight that needs everybody.
Yes, thank you for saying that. And I want to reiterate some key takeaways, right? We're going to keep talking about it. We're going to do self-care. We're going to get involved however we can, and build those coalitions, right? And again, for people listening and watching, we have resources in the chat, and we would love to connect with you and would love to provide anything else we can as far as support or information. Please reach out. I have one more question from the audience, and you were already talking about it a little bit, Gina. So feel free to jump right in, or anybody can take this. But how can people in Las Vegas support effort for survivors? So what can we do here locally?
So here in Southern Nevada at the local level, we have our Moms Demand Action Chapter. I am the survivor member co-lead for the state with my sister Marissa. We actually have a meeting coming up for survivors only, which is October 7th. And then we have monthly meetings for volunteers or anyone that hasn't been impacted by gun violence. And the way to be involved with your local Moms Demand chapter is to text the word join to 64433. And that's the word join to 64433. And then if you are a survivor and you've been impacted and you want national resources or connect to myself, you would text the word survivor to 64433. And so I know, I'm sure Sandy and Lonnie will talk about more about survivor resources. So at the national level, there's virtual support groups. And then here at the local level in Southern Nevada, I'm just trying to connect to as many survivors that are here that want to share their stories, share stories of daily gun violence, and making a connection support group so that we know that there are people out there. And at the local level as well, just volunteering for people that haven't been impacted too. So those are both options. Also, I sent my email as well. It's nevadasurvivors@gmail.com. And that's a direct link to me and my sister. However you want to get involved in this work. If you identify as a survivor or a volunteer, we're here, and we always need more people.
And we have a survivors toolkit that we developed with Giffords that is online. It's on our website, survivorsempowered.org. It's also on the Giffords website. It is free to anyone who needs it. You can download it and print it out if you want to, or you can just read it online. But we know that the resources there have been very helpful to survivors. We thought when we first did it, we thought it was going to be primarily for new survivors, but we have found that survivors who have been looking for resources for a while or have been unhappy with resources that they have found have been using it and have found it to be quite useful. We've also developed a program with Giffords that we are going around to different communities doing mini trainings, day trainings on mindfulness, restoration, and trauma, and how to get involved and how to tell your story most effectively. So we've got those programs going on as well. Anything else that I've forgotten?
You covered it.
Okay, I covered it. Boom.
Thank you so much. We are putting all that info in the chat, as well as the Giffords info as well. So, and again, if anybody misses it after this show, or you're watching it after you're watching the recording, please feel free to reach out. We do have one more question in the chat here. And I don't know if it's any, but it's more of an opinion of what you all think. But Diane wanted to know how we go about changing the culture. A lot of entertainment features firearms. It's a knee-jerk response to conflict resolution. Guns are almost treated as a fashion accessory. So if anybody wants to jump in there.
Well, we've worked with Hollywood in the past trying to get them to change that word, and we haven't given up. We would love to see every time they use a gun in a Hollywood movie or TV movie that there is a charge for doing so, and that charge goes towards helping survivors in the services they need. That's a long way off, but little drips, constant little drips. We've been lucky enough to meet some Hollywood people, and so we just continue to drip on them. And anybody else who wants to help us, you're welcome to help, because it's going to take quite a while. One other thing, one of the culture differences that we have is in this country is the Second Amendment. So Giffords has been working very closely with gun owners because what we have found is most gun owners, number one, are not NRA members. And second of all, finding a commonality with them is not as difficult as people think it is. You've got extremists on either side that you're going to have conflict with. But if you look at the general population, they're pretty moderate and they're pretty angry that we can't resolve this. So Giffords working with them, it's gun owners for safety. And it's on their website. So if you are a gun owner, somebody is a gun owner, don't be afraid of having that conversation, and don't be afraid of leading them towards Giffords safety.
And we are gun owners, and we tell other gun owners that there are certain things that we've always been taught. Sandy went through the NRA safety course when she was 10 years old.
When they were a safety organization. Yeah.
So we know about gun safety, and that saves lives. And if you're a gun owner, you would want to talk about that.
And unfortunately, we talk about responsible gun ownership. And unfortunately, most gun owners think they're responsible but aren't. So that's a whole nother education piece that needs to be addressed as we move forward.
Yeah, I think we can probably do a whole episode on just that, right? And same. I've come across so many gun owners that, they can make the distinction, and the NRA, again, something we can make a whole other episode on, but we won't, since we are wrapping. We are coming to the top of the hour, so we want to kind of wrap up this conversation. I want to start by thanking you all again, or end, I should say, by thanking you all again for joining us. I do want to go to each of you for final thoughts before we wrap the show. Lonnie and Sandy, I'll start with you.
Well, I think we're in a very good place in this country right now. People are speaking out on this issue more and more. We have an office now at the White House for gun violence prevention. We have an election next year, and the more that we can push people to really look at this one issue, right? This one issue, and make it your issue. If you really care about the safety of our children, your family, and your grandchildren, you have to be addressing this issue.
So yeah, I can see a change, especially on the state level. And as we know, we have to get so many states to fall in line, and then we go for the federal laws. But we've seen a lot of changes. When Sandy and I began this, the presidential debates, they would not even discuss the word gun. They nothing about it. Now it's changed. We are getting so many more survivors involved. They're growing exponentially.
And there were no survivor-led national organizations back then. 12 years ago, they didn't exist. Gabby created hers, we created ours, and now there are lots of them out there. And that's where things have really turned with the survivors' voices and organizing the survivors to use their voices.
Thanks so much. Gina, final thoughts?
I'm just grateful, as always, because I think this organization especially highlights survivor voices and encourages us to share our stories. And just like Lonnie and Sandy said, that's how we keep going. That's how we create change. So I'm just grateful to be a survivor in this movement, surrounded by other survivors that inspire me to keep going. And together we can end gun violence.
Thank you. Erin?
Yeah, I think it just piggybacking on what Gina said earlier is that everyone has a role to play and everyone has a voice, and it is so important to center survivor perspectives and survivor voices, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a role for other folks to be involved. And if you have a platform, if you have a way to impact other people that or impact people who see you on social media, there are things that you can do. I think we're all really tired of thoughts and prayers every time we turn on CNN or anywhere else, not to say anything negative about them, but there is something we all can do that's more than just saying thoughts and prayers. And no one should feel like there isn't a role for them.
Absolutely. And I hope everybody is inspired by, hearing from you all. I know I am. So hopefully we can keep this momentum going and keep talking about it, keep doing the little things, the big things, the hard things. And thank you all again for joining us on the panel. Thank you, everybody else who tuned in, and everybody take care and have a safe night. Thank you.